Okay, so when I am getting ready to make salve, I do try to use more of the inner bark part as opposed to the outer bark. And since I have so much bark, I get to pick and choose. So you'll see that this does not have any of the outer bark. If you only have the outer bark, don't sit and worry about peeling it. It becomes very tedious. I personally find that meditative, but other people, they begin to, I don't want to do herbs, it's too hard. So for me, like I said, working with pine bark is meditative. You smell your hands, and your hands smell like pine, and you smell like a wild person, and I just love that, being a wild woman. But anyway, so we've got we've put in just the inner bark here. The inner bark is going to give up its medicinal qualities more readily than the outer bark. So this is going to work a little bit faster in the 24 hours that I'm going to let it set. And then I'm simply just going to pour olive oil over it. And I don't know that I'm going to cover this all the way. We'll just see. I'm going to actually turn you guys off because I need to have both hands. But I'll be right back. So this seems about right to me. I want to have plenty of pine bark compared to the olive oil. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat this up just till I start seeing this kind of bubble maybe a little bit. I don't want to get it too hot. If I see it bubbling, I'm turning it off immediately. I may just have it on low heat, and then I cover it and let it set, and then I'll turn it back on from time to time just to heat the oil back up, because of course the warm oil is going to take the medicinal qualities out of the pine bark. So I'm going to just put this, I found a burner, and I'm going to put this on there, and I'll show you that in a minute. So I'm just going to put this on the back burner here. We're going to keep it on a nice low heat until it looks like it's, getting to the sizzle part. And of course I can't find a spoon. We were just doing so much cooking here today that and making of medicinals and things like that I'm running out of spoons and clean pans, so got to go and do some dishes here real quick. But anyway, we're going to just let this sit, and then I've got the cover right here, and we're just going to cover this. And again, this is just to we're taking the medicinal value out of the pine bark and putting it into the olive oil, and then we'll strain that all out. And this, because bark is of course much more thick, heavy, doesn't give up its medicinal value as easy, it's going to take about 24 hours. And I like to do it slow. You can also do it on a basically where you just put it in the pine bark and let it set for 2 months, 3 months, or put the pine bark into the oil and let it set for a couple months, and then strain it off. And that's called a cold infusion. This is a warm one. This really isn't an infusion because we're doing it in oil and we're boiling it, but that's what it's often called. But we're going to do it warm, basically because I'm going to make a salve, and I'm going to have to heat that up anyway to put the beeswax into it. And this is one thing real quick: if you don't have olive oil, or olive oil is too expensive for you to be using for salves, my goodness, don't use it. People were making salves in the Middle Ages before they had money, before they were making it in England where you didn't grow olives. You can use anything that is a fat. If you have just plain cheap vegetable oil from Costco, go for it. If you have lard, if you butchered a pig and you got some lard, heat the lard up to make it into a liquid and put your pine bark in. Then you won't need to mix much, if any, beeswax into it. People have been making salves for a very long time. What we're trying to do is just simply put the medicinal value of the pine bark into the oil, and that will help. And the oil is something you can smooth onto yourself, and you can also store the oil, and you can smooth that onto yourself, as opposed to if you're just going to use the pine bark, you've got to go out and get yourself a pine tree, cut the piece off, and then wrap it around you, which works as well, and you probably got more medicinal value that way. But this is more of a preservative, way of preserving it, and a way of making it into a gentler salve to put on a wound, because wrapping a piece of pine bark around the wound, you are going to feel that. So anyway, don't worry about, oh, I gotta have olive oil, but it's so darn expensive. Go buy cheap vegetable oil if that's all you have. I like the purity of olive oil. That's what I'm going to use. I get mine through trade. I trade maple syrup even up for olive oil, except for this last year, which my maple syrup was worth much more than the olive oil was. But anyway, that's why I use it, because I can get it for a trade. I barter for it. But use what you have. Don't be all like, like I said, people have been doing this for a very long time. They've been making it over fires instead of on a nice stove, stainless steel pots. You know how we're doing it now with cold pressed olive oil. Use what you have. Use what you can afford. Herbs are medicine for the people. Sorry, I got a squirrel on the roof and I can hear him. Anyway, herbs are medicine for the people, and the people that's all people. They're equal opportunity medicinal. It's not just for rich people who can afford health insurance. So don't worry if you can't afford the olive oil. Use what you got. So we have our, we've been doing our bark for about, I'd say about 20 hours here. And you can see, obviously the color has changed in much of it. Some of it is still light. We haven't quite finished with it yet. But another thing that you'll notice is that it's very brittle, and that's pretty much a good sign. The darker is getting brittler, more brittle and more brittle. Brittler. Let's just make up New English words here. But the darker color is very brittle, which actually, if you're planning on eating pine bark, that's what you want to have, because you want the fibers to be able to break down. But what that means is medicinally it has given up most of what it has to offer. We're still going to go on this for another I'm going to say about 4 hours or so. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of this is sage. Sage is another antimicrobial. And then I'm going to add some pine needles to this. And that's going to go for the last 4 hours. And maybe we'll make it go a little bit longer. I'll stir this in and everything. And the sage is there mainly to put a little bit more antimicrobial action into it, along with the pines. The pine needle will put its own medicinal value in, but the pine needles mainly are for the added scent. Pine scent is a ancestral. We carry, most people carry an ancestral memory of pine scent being a cleaner, or a way of being clean, and that's because our ancestors, though they probably didn't know about microbes, had used pine as an antimicrobial. In fact, if you're out in the I teach this in some of my classes. If you're out in the wilderness, whether in a survival situation or just out camping, and you do your business, you urinate or defecate out in the woods, you can go and run your hands after you've cleaned yourself up back there. You can run your hands down a pine bough with the needles on, and the oils from the needle, which are antimicrobial, will help kill off any bacteria on your hand. In a survival situation, one of the biggest dangers to us is the lack of hygiene, and that's one way of killing off some of these germs that can cause things like dysentery, diarrhea, I guess it's the same thing, but can cause a lot of these stomach upsets that have in intense situations have caused many people to die. So the pine needles, the pine scent becomes it's an ancestral memory. Our ancestors used it for a very long time. This is why we have things like now pine sol, which are actually not pine scented. They're chemically scented. Many of our cleaners are. Not all of them. Some of them do say natural scents. I'd like to see what exactly those natural scents are, but we have it in us that pine is a cleansing smell. So we even have, we faked the pine scent just because it makes us feel cleaner. And while we are getting some medicinal value out of the pine needles, our main thing that we're putting in here is the scent of the pine. So we're going to get this stuff, I'm going to kind of stir this around a little bit and get the green underneath down into the oil. And then we'll let this go heat up again on a very, very low heat. We're just trying to slowly extract the medicinal values, the scents, everything from this without destroying them. And a higher heat might destroy them. So we're just adding this in, and then in about 4 hours we're going to strain off all this plant material. So we're going to let this sit for a little bit, and then on a very low heat, and then we'll be straining this plant material out and adding beeswax for our salve, and then we'll have pine bark salve. Well, we're actually going to have white pine and sage salve, which are two antimicrobials that work really well together. We're looking down into our pot after about 3 hours or so, and if you're looking over here, let's see if I can pull a couple up. Pulling the bark up instead. But these are the pine needles against the side, and when I'm looking through the camera they look awfully green, but they're actually lost most of their color. And the sage has definitely lost its color. And so at this point I am going to figure that this is done. I've got set up over here, I've got a strainer with over a container, and that's what we're going to do is we're going to strain out the plant material, and we'll get the oil down below. We're going to get the pot that we just got done with, we're going to wipe it out and get it ready for heating up, because our next step is to melt some beeswax and harden this off and turn it into a salve. Okay, so we have about 1.5 cups of infused oil here. This is our pine bark and sage, or our white pine and sage infused oil. And the oil in itself will work fine as a healing. That's where all your medicinal value is right now. So you can keep it as an oil if you like it. Most people tend to like to have it as a salve or a little bit thicker. And how we're going to thicken it up is with natural beeswax. And if you've ever watched me make salve videos before, what I do is I kind of halfway measure it out. And so if I've got a little over 1.5 cups of oil here, so then I put about 1.5 cups of beeswax in, grated beeswax. But here's the thing, I've been making salve all day, and this is the last of the beeswax that I have, and other than that I have to go out and break in a whole another big chunk of it, another about 5-pound chunk I think is my next size down. So I don't want to do that, and I'm basically going to use what I have here. I've got my oil back in. I want it on low. I don't want to heat it up super much. And then I'm just going to start melting my beeswax. And while this is melting down, I'm going to get my container set up so that as soon as the last bit of beeswax melts, I'm going to pour it into the container. So I'll be back in a little bit. So I've got just the last little bit here, and you guys are, oh, there we go, it's gone. And you guys are already blinking, so who knows, maybe you won't last, the batteries won't last long enough for me to do this. So I turn the heat off and immediately pour it in. And I've got I want my dishes all set up, so I immediately pour it into the dishes. This is the main one that I wanted, so if I got more, then I'll put it into the little ones. But it doesn't looks like it's all going to fit really nice in here. So there we go. And now all we got to do is let it cool. So this one has decided to cool from the bottom up, so we've got you can kind of see there's almost like a layer of lightness, and it's getting slowly lighter as we go up. In fact, if you look down on it, we're starting to get little swirls even here on the top. So just it doesn't take that long. If you've got them in little smaller jars, like if you're going to sell them or anything like that, it'll cool in a matter of minutes. This takes about half an hour to cool, and then your salve is ready. But I would make sure that it was completely cool. So here's our white pine and sage salve. And it's all nice and hardened and everything. And looks like I eyeballed the beeswax pretty well. This is an antimicrobial salve. It'll be really good for after a wound has been washed out. You can put this over the wound to help knit the sides together, help the healing begin, and keep the microbes out. And because it's a softening agent, it'll help prevent scarring, or at least minimize scarring for any bad wounds. This is perfectly safe for using on animals, because even if they lick it off, all it is perfectly consumable things.